So, I want you to try something like intensely physical right now.
Oh, starting right out of the gate. I like it.
Yeah, right into it. Wherever you happen to be listening to this deep dive, just reach out and firmly tap something solid.
Like, actually do it, yeah?
Exactly. It could be, the wooden desk right in front of you,
Yeah.
or maybe the leather steering wheel of your car.
Or even if you're just, like, sitting quietly in a room, you could just listen to the ambient silence around you
Right.
and then just clap your hands.
Make a sudden, sharp sound. So go ahead, actually do it. Notice that sensation.
Feel that absolute undeniable resistance pushing back against your skin.
Right. Or listen to the way the sound just violently breaks the silence.
Because in that exact fraction of a second, your brain does something really specific.
It registers a definitively binary state of reality.
Hmm.
It tells you, there is this strict, uncrossable border.
Right, like your hand ends and the desk begins.
Exactly. The silence ends and the noise begins. It feels, almost like looking at a clear X-ray of a broken bone in a doctor's office.
Oh, the X-ray analogy from the sources, that's a great one.
Yeah, because you see the stark black background,
right.
and you see the jagged white line running right through the bone.
And the doctor just, like, taps the film with a pen and says, broken or not broken.
Broken or not broken, all ambiguity completely vanishes, and honestly, it is incredibly comforting to have that.
Oh, absolutely. We desperately want the entire universe to operate exactly like that X-ray machine.
We really do. We want these absolute hard lines drawn between, existence and non-existence, or good and evil, success and failure.
And, we essentially build our entire psychological framework around a universe that's neatly categorized into these rigid, independent opposites.
But there's like a biological reason for that, isn't there? We're not just doing it to be stubborn.
No, not at all. There's a very good biological reason why we crave that kind of precision. This binary categorizing is literally the foundation of our evolutionary survival mechanism.
Because our nervous systems didn't exactly evolve to ponder the metaphysical fluidity of the cosmos.
Right, they evolved to keep us alive on the savannah. I mean, to survive, the human visual cortex had to become highly specialized in this computational process we call edge detection.
Edge detection, which is basically finding the exact boundary where one thing ends and another begins.
Exactly. If you're navigating a highly dangerous environment, you just cannot afford to view the world as this seamless, interdependent tapestry.
You get eaten.
You'd absolutely get eaten.
Yeah.
You need your brain to instantly draw a hard, absolute boundary between the concept of, say, a tiger and the concept of a tree.
Right.
The brain actually spends an enormous amount of caloric energy processing lines and shadows and contrast just to define the boundary of an apple sitting against a table.
So we physically must force reality into these strict dualities, like safe versus dangerous, self versus other.
We do, but here's the problem. While this binary edge detection keeps us alive biologically, it creates this profound psychological and philosophical condition.
Which the ancient texts we're diving into today call the disease of reification.
Yes, reification.
And reification basically means taking something that is inherently fluid or abstract or interdependent and mentally freezing it into this solid, absolute, independent thing.
Right. We take fluid processes and we just freeze them into permanent opposites. We assume that, well, because our brain detects an edge between noise and silence or movement and stillness, that those two concepts must exist as absolute, independent entities out in the universe.
Like they're completely cut off from each other.
Exactly. But they aren't. And because we treat these shifting, deeply interconnected events as absolute, unchangeable facts, we end up suffering immensely.
Because we're constantly grasping at these frozen dualities, right?
Yeah, and when they inevitably melt or shift or change, we experience this really profound anxiety.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to take that comfortable, solid reality you just tapped, that rigid binary framework of dualities, and put it under the ultimate philosophical microscope.
We really are. We're drawing from this incredibly rigorous diagnostic logic of Madhyamaka.
Specifically, an 11-step analytical framework developed by the philosopher Nagarjuna.
Right, Nagarjuna. He was a thinker in 2nd century India who essentially looked at human suffering and realized, that almost all of it stems from how our minds literally chop up the universe.
And we are going to use his logic today to systematically dismantle the very concept of dualities.
And we should clarify, the focus of our sources today is incredibly precise. We're not going to analyze the usual philosophical triads like the perceiver and the perceived, or the goer and the going.
Well, we've done that in other deep dives. Today, we are going exclusively after the dualities themselves.
Yes. We will analyze the two opposites of any duality, whether that is good and evil, relative and absolute, existence and non-existence, or ordinary and enlightened.
We're going to demonstrate that reality always oscillates, and that there is no absolute ground, no frozen extreme anywhere in the universe for you to grasp onto.
So we're essentially taking the ultimate X-ray machine of our minds, and we're going to prove that the machine itself is empty.
I love that. So let's get into it. The very first move in this diagnostic step 1, it requires us to map out the conceptual landscape, right?
Right, because whenever human beings try to analyze reality, our minds naturally carve things up.
Right.
So to analyze any duality using this framework, we have to translate it into 3 distinct spheres. And we'll use generic terms, so this logic applies universally to literally anything you can think of.
Okay, lay out the 3 spheres for us.
So the 3 spheres are, number 1, opposite 1, number 2, the relation, opposition, or union between the two opposites, and number 3, opposite 2.
Okay, let's unpack this and apply it to a classic everyday duality, like the concept of noise and silence, which we mentioned earlier.
Perfect example.
Yep.
So opposite 1 is noise, opposite 2 is silence. And that middle sphere is the relation, or the opposition between them. It's the boundary line.
And our default cognitive setting, as we just discussed with edge detection, is to assume these are entirely separate, independent entities.
Exactly. We think of noise as this positive active force, and silence as a completely separate, empty void.
Or like good and evil, right? We think of them as 2 totally distinct forces warring out there in the cosmos.
Yeah, or if you look at samsara and nirvana, samsara being the ordinary, painful world of suffering, and nirvana being enlightened liberation, we view them as 2 entirely different physical locations.
Oh, for sure. We think of samsara as this burning building and nirvana as a cool, safe forest a mile away.
Exactly.
And that feels entirely natural to me. I mean, it's literally how I organize my day. Good things happen here, bad things happen there. They are separate categories in my planner.
Right. And that assumption is what we call inherent existence. In Sanskrit, it's called svabhava.
Svabhava.
Yes. We basically assume that opposite 1 and opposite 2 possess their own independent, standalone reality. Like they have their own inherent essence from their own side, totally regardless of anything else.
But this is where the logic trap is sprung. This brings us to step 2 of the analysis, the application of the tetralemma.
The tetralemma, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the 4-cornered logic test. It is basically the ultimate stress test for human cognition.
So we're going to take our 2 opposites and run them through these 4 extremes of logic just to see if they can possibly exist as independent entities.
Right. And the 4 extremes being, are the 2 opposites identical? Are they different? Are they both? Or are they neither?
Let's start with corner number 1. Are opposite 1 and opposite 2 identical? Like if we take a duality like the conventional world of appearances and the ultimate truth of emptiness, are they the exact same inherent thing? Or let's use good and evil, are they identical?
Well, if we claim they're perfectly identical, the entire distinction completely collapses. The functional world just ceases to operate.
Walk me through that.
Let's use the duality of the conventional world and the ultimate truth. If the conventional everyday world is mathematically inherently identical to ultimate emptiness, then nothing could function.
How so?
Think about dropping a glass of water. Conventionally, it has form, it holds liquid, it falls, it shatters, right?
Right, you have to clean it up.
Exactly. But ultimately, according to this philosophy, it is empty of a permanent inherent essence. But if those 2 opposites are identical, if form is literally the exact same thing as emptiness in every possible absolute way, then dropping the glass wouldn't shatter it.
Because emptiness has no physical form to break.
Bingo. Emptiness doesn't shatter on a tile floor.
Wow, okay. And if we look at samsara and nirvana, right?
Yeah.
The ordinary world of suffering versus the state of liberation.
Yeah, that's another great one.
If they are perfectly identical in an absolute sense, then the entire concept of seeking liberation becomes a complete joke.
Right, because if the illness and the cure are the exact same thing, there is no healing. The whole concept of a spiritual path, of personal growth, of trying to be a better person, it's basically deleted from reality.
So claiming the opposites are identical is definitively out. It just doesn't work.
It doesn't. And the mind immediately recognizes that failure, right? So it jumps to corner number 2, difference.
And this is where the vast majority of human beings comfortably live.
Yeah.
We just assume the two opposites are completely different and inherently separate.
Exactly.
And I have to say, I'm still not buying that this is a problem. My modern biological brain is screaming that things are different. Like, my parked car is inherently different from a moving car.
Mm-hmm.
Good is entirely separate from evil. Noise is completely different from silence.
Feels obvious, right?
It does. The desk I tapped earlier is undeniably different from my hand.
Yeah.
So walk me through the physics of why that paralyzes the universe. Why is difference a problem?
Okay, we have to differentiate here between conventional categorization and absolute inherent existence. Conventionally, yes, you absolutely categorize a parked car and a moving car differently, mostly to avoid getting run over. That is highly functional.
Right. I need to know which one to walk in front of.
Exactly. But we are testing for absolute inherent existence. If opposite 1 and opposite 2 were inherently absolutely separate, it means they possess closed-loop essences.
Closed-loop essences, meaning what?
Well, an independent entity, by strict philosophical definition, does not rely on, react to, or interact with anything outside of itself. If it did interact with something else, it would be contingent on other things.
And therefore not independent anymore.
Right. So an independent essence has a massive impenetrable wall around it. It's a completely closed system.
Okay, I'm following.
So if existence and non-existence, or say movement and stillness, were entirely separate, inherently existing opposites, there would be an unbridgeable metaphysical void between them.
They could never touch.
They could never interact. One could never transition into the other. The text actually often used the analogy of a seed and a sprout to explain this causal interaction.
Let's apply that, but let's use our dualities, like changing and unchanging, or ordinary and enlightened.
Sure. Or let's just stick with movement and stillness. If your car possesses the inherent absolute essence of stillness, it's a closed loop.
Right. It is fundamentally essentially still.
So if the car's stillness is absolute and entirely independent from movement, how could it ever move?
Well, I turn the engine on.
But the engine turning on is a movement. But you just said the car is inherently still. The stillness would have to be completely destroyed for the movement to begin.
Okay.
But an absolute essence cannot be destroyed. Otherwise, it wasn't absolute to begin with.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. If the ordinary conditioned state of a human mind is absolutely separate from the enlightened state, you could meditate for 1,000,000 years and you'd never cross the gap. Absolute boundaries literally cannot be crossed.
Because if existence is absolutely separate from non-existence, nothing could ever be born and nothing could ever die.
Exactly. The universe would just be this frozen, paralyzed photograph.
That is really starting to click for me. Because if I define good and evil as entirely separate, independent entities with their own absolute borders, they can never actually define each other or even interact in the human heart.
Yep.
If the seed of existence is completely isolated in its own little absolute bubble, it can never become the sprout of non-existence. So absolute difference totally breaks the mechanics of the universe. Nothing can ever change.
And we know things change.
Yeah.
I mean, we observe causality every single second of our lives. Therefore, the opposites simply cannot be inherently different.
So they cannot be identical and they cannot be different. Which brings us to corner number 3. Are they both identical and different at the same time?
Ah, yes. The both corner.
People love to say this when they get trapped in a debate, you know? Well, it's a bit of both, depending on how you look at it. It is the ultimate conversational escape hatch.
It totally is. But in this logical framework, it's just a retreat into contradiction. Mashing two broken logical bridges together doesn't somehow engineer a stable one.
Right.
You cannot claim that a shape is completely a square and completely a circle in the exact same absolute sense. If we've already proven that identical leads to absurdity and different leads to a frozen universe, combining them just gives you an absurd frozen universe.
It's just a logical pileup.
Exactly. Claiming the opposites are both is just cognitive dissonance masquerading as profundity. It violates basic logic. You are literally just stacking errors on top of each other.
Which leaves us with the final corner of the Tetralemma, proposition 4. Are the opposites neither identical nor different? Like, maybe it's just an unsolvable mystery. Maybe reality just operates in this mystical realm of neither.
To claim they are neither is to essentially throw yourself into absolute nihilism. It denies our lived experience entirely.
Because it just rejects everything.
Right. If good and evil, or noise and silence, are neither identical nor different, then you are essentially saying those concepts don't function at all. You are denying that a traffic light turns red, or that you can even hear my voice right now.
Because to function, there has to be some kind of distinction.
Yes. If things are neither identical nor different, you cannot make any distinctions whatsoever, not even conventional ones. It's a total denial of the functional world.
So if we look at what we've done here, every single extreme position we can possibly take to describe the relationship between the two opposites of a duality leads straight to a logical disaster.
Every single one.
They aren't identical, they aren't different, they aren't both, and they are neither. If none of those four extremes work, then what are we left with? Are we just grasping at empty air?
We are grasping at empty air. And that realization right there forces us into step 3 of the diagnostic.
Step 3.
Because the tetralemma systematically destroys all four extremes, we must conclude that the two opposites, opposite 1 and opposite 2, and the relation or union between them are completely ungraspable. They are empty of inherent existence.
Empty of inherent existence. Now, we have to be incredibly careful with that word, empty. Right.
Very careful, yes.
Because emptiness is not a dark void. It is not some giant eraser wiping the chalkboard of the universe clean. It is not a featureless cosmic soup where nothing matters.
No, not at all.
Where
When we say the duality of noise and silence is empty, it simply means that noise does not possess a permanent independent noise essence from its own side. And silence doesn't either.
they are absolutely never absolute.
Right. Good, evil, existence, non-existence, ordinary, enlightened. None of these dualities exist as glowing platonic ideals floating around in a void somewhere waiting for us to discover them.
Yeah.
They just lack a standalone essence.
Okay, but if these opposites lack an independent core, if they are empty of absolute essence, how do they actually exist? Because I can still hear noise, I can still sit in silence. How do they function if they're empty?
That leads us directly to step 4. The answer is that they are inseparable, they are dependently co-originated, interdependent, co-defined, and co-evolving.
Dependently co-originated. Okay, let's ground this with a relatable analogy for the listener. Think of the duality of a parent and a child.
Oh, that's the perfect representation of two opposites that are co-defined.
Right, because you cannot possess the inherent absolute identity of a parent floating alone in a dark vacuum. The identity of the parent is strictly 100% co-defined by the existence of the child.
Exactly.
The very act of the child coming into existence is what gives birth to the parent. The act gives birth to the actor.
The opposites rely entirely on each other. You cannot have the concept of long without the concept of short. Like, if you have a stick, is it long or short?
Well, it depends entirely on what you place next to it.
Exactly. The stick itself has no inherent longness. You cannot have finite without infinite. You cannot have arising without non-arising. They literally lean against each other like two sheaves of reeds. If you pull one away, the other instantly collapses.
So if we extrapolate this to the dualities we really obsess over, like success and failure, or changing and unchanging, or dependence and independence, we start to see that they are mere designations.
Mere designations. Yes, they are names.
They are conventional tools co-imputed by our own minds just to navigate reality. They are the cognitive software we wrote to make sense of the world. They are not the hard, physical hardware of the universe.
They are cognitive software. We impute them onto reality so that we can function. And this takes us into the elegance of step 5, where the logic becomes highly recursive.
That's 5.
Yes. We look at the union of the two truths operating about the opposites themselves.
The two truths being the conventional appearance and the ultimate truth.
Right. The conventional appearance is the way things flawlessly function in everyday life. Cars moving, water pouring, sound traveling. The ultimate truth is their emptiness of inherent existence. The fact that none of these things have an independent core.
And what's so profound here is that these two truths apply to the dualities themselves. One truth perfectly supports, implies, and energizes the other.
Let's take the duality of movement and stillness again. Conventionally, movement and stillness function perfectly. I walk across the room, then I sit still. The conventional truth is undeniable.
But they can only function conventionally because both are ultimately empty of a frozen absolute essence.
Exactly.
Like we discussed earlier with the car, if stillness had an absolute frozen inherent essence, I could never stand up and walk. I would be trapped in stillness forever. The emptiness of the opposites is exactly what allows them to interact and transition.
The lack of rigid boundaries is what permits the entire dance of the universe. The appearance is the emptiness, and the emptiness allows the appearance. They are not in opposition at all.
Right.
And because they are dependently arisen and empty in this way, step 6 concludes that the two opposites in their relation are exactly like illusions, reflections in a mirror, mirages, dreams, or echoes.
I really love the echo metaphor from the sources. Let's really look at an echo in a canyon.
It's a great visual.
Because conventionally, the echo is undeniably there. It is a real acoustic wave. You yell into the Grand Canyon and the sound bounces off the rock wall. You hear it. It can literally startle a bird into taking flight. It has a functional, causal impact on the world.
Right.
But if you try to walk down into the canyon and physically grab that sound wave with your bare hands, you just grab empty air.
It slips right through your fingers. You absolutely cannot locate its inherent core because it's a dependent phenomenon. It relies on the shape of the canyon, the density of the air, the origin of the shout. It is an interdependent event. It is not an independent thing.
It's entirely ungraspable. It is there, yet not there. And dualities operate exactly like this. The boundary between self and other, or good and evil, functions conventionally to help us navigate society. But if you try to isolate the absolute core of goodness, you find empty air.
You do?
But human psychology, as we discussed with edge detection, it hates ambiguity. When the mind realizes the world is just an echo, it panics, it gets terrified, it wants to build new boxes to hide in.
Oh, the mind desperately wants to turn the philosophy itself into a new absolute. It wants to say, okay, so the opposites are an illusion, which means non-duality is the absolute truth. I will just grasp onto emptiness.
We try to freeze the cure into a new disease.
Exactly. We turn the realization of emptiness into a new, reified concept. We try to make emptiness a thing. And this is why Nagarjuna forces us to transcend the conceptual grid entirely. We have to move to step 7.
Step 7. Okay. To prevent the mind from building a new religion out of this, we must apply the Generalized Tetralemma.
Yes.
We have to affirm that the two opposites and their union are not this. They are not non-this, they are not both, and they are not neither for whatever this happens to be.
For whatever this happens to be. And that phrase covers every noun, every verb, every concept, every philosophy you can possibly conjure in your mind.
Okay, I have to interject here because you are telling me I cannot categorize reality at all. And that completely breaks my language. It literally breaks my grammar.
It does.
My sentences fundamentally require subjects and objects. I have to say, the tree is tall or the car is moving. If I can't use dualities, how can I even order a cup of coffee? How do I speak about the universe if language itself is an extreme?
You have hit the exact boundary of human cognition. Yes, language fails. Language is a conventional tool of duality.
Because it has to be.
Right. It was built to chop the world into subjects and objects so we could point at tigers and run away. We literally cannot box reality into any dualistic categories whatsoever. It is not existent, it is not non-existent, it is not dual, and it is not non-dual.
So the words are just pointers.
Exactly. We use words to point toward the reality, but the map is never the territory. The word water cannot quench your thirst.
So having completely exhausted all menus of human philosophy, having realized we can't use this or non-this, we arrive at step 9.
Step 9. The middle way.
The middle way.
Yes. The middle way is the absolute healthiest attitude we can adopt toward any duality. It is entirely free from all extremes.
What are the extremes in this context?
Well, it's free from the extreme of eternalism, which is the belief that things are solid, permanent, and possess inherent existence. And it is free from the extreme of nihilism, which is the dark belief that nothing exists or matters. It is also free from the middle muddle of both or neither.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Because the middle way isn't just like standing paralyzed in the center of the room refusing to make a decision.
No, not at all.
It makes me think of riding a bicycle.
Oh, I like that.
Because the middle way isn't a frozen, rigid line painted on the concrete that you have to perfectly adhere to. If you lean too far to the right on a bike, into eternalism and grasping, you crash. If you lean too far to the left into nihilism and apathy, you crash.
Right.
The middle way is the dynamic, continuous micro-adjustments you make while pedaling. Reality is a fluid dance. It always oscillates between opposites and poles. You engage with the gravity of the universe without being crushed by it.
You are participating in the oscillation without freezing it. You are maintaining balance not by standing still, but by responding to the changing environment. Which brings us to the ultimate practical question addressed in step 10.
Yes, because it is exhilarating to stare into the indescribable echo of reality during a late-night debate, but eventually, the alarm clock goes off.
Right, Monday morning still happens.
Exactly. How do you, the listener, navigate a high-stakes corporate meeting or a brutal traffic jam or paying your mortgage if dualities like success and failure or good and evil are just ungraspable echoes?
And this is where Madhyamaka transitions from being a rigorous logic puzzle to a profoundly liberating psychology. Step 10 tells us that we must use these opposites conventionally, but never in absolute terms.
Never absolute.
Right. We use the dualities without attachment, without reification, without immense effort, and without absolutes. We use them while fully, continuously knowing their true, empty nature.
It's acting without acting. Let's bring in an analogy from modern gaming, like playing Elden Ring, or really any intensely difficult video game.
Good example.
When you are playing, you engage passionately. You strategize, you dodge the fire, you care deeply about the conventional outcome of surviving the boss fight. You play by the rules of the game. You utilize conventional causality within that world.
You are fully immersed in the mechanics of the duality. Winning versus losing. Living versus dying.
But deep down, no matter how intense the fight gets, you never experience genuine existential trauma when your character dies.
Right, because you know it's a game.
You know the dragon isn't inherently real, it's made of pixels. You act without acting. You function skillfully, intensely, within the dualities of winning and losing. But you are liberated from taking them as an absolute physical reality that dictates your soul's worth.
You engage with the conventional truth of the game while simultaneously resting in the ultimate truth of its emptiness. You navigate the corporate meeting using the dualities of success and failure, but if you fail, you don't reify that failure into a permanent stain on your absolute self.
Right, you don't freeze the fluid event into an eternal identity. You drop the heavy concepts. Which reminds me of the ancient metaphor of the raft.
Well, the raft is a perfect image for this.
You use the dualities, the logic, the framework of the two truths, the language of success and failure, continuity and discontinuity, as a heavy wooden raft to cross the raging, dangerous river of your own anxiety and confusion. The raft is highly functional. It keeps you from drowning.
But once you reach the shore of understanding, you don't pick up that heavy wooden raft and carry it on your back through the forest for the rest of your life.
You'd be crushed by the weight of it.
Exactly. You drop the philosophy, you drop the dualities, you leave the raft on the shore.
Which brings us to our final step, step 11. The absolute culmination of this entire diagnostic journey.
We made
it. We've dropped the raft. We are on the shore. What does the world look like now?
Well, when you finally drop that conceptual raft, when you are released from the tyrannical, desperate hold of all concepts and dualities, you reach a profound shift in perception. Step 11 concludes that we might as well perceive everything, including the two opposites and the relation between them, as primordially equal, pure, perfect, complete, divine, and one.
One. We have to be so incredibly careful with that word.
Right? Careful. Yes.
Because if we just say everything is one, the listener's mind immediately defaults to monism. We think, oh, we are all just identical drops of water in a giant featureless cosmic soup. The boundaries between me and the chair are completely fake, and reality is just a massive blur of oneness.
And this is the crucial distinction and why we spent so much time dismantling the identical corner of the Tetralemma earlier.
Right.
When the texts say one, they mean it in the strictly non-dual sense. This means not many, not one, not both, and not neither.
So it's not monism?
If monism were true, the universe would break. If there were absolutely no conventional boundaries, biological existence would shut down. If you and a dog are the exact same undifferentiated soup, a dog bite cannot occur. Teeth cannot pierce skin without a conventional boundary.
So it is not a featureless soup that erases difference. It is a luminous, interdependent web. The oneness is the shared emptiness, the shared interdependent nature of every single unique, vivid thing.
Yes.
Every leaf on a tree is unique, yet every leaf shares the exact same empty, interdependent nature. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this leads to the most breathtaking ethical extrapolation of the entire philosophy.
Boundless compassion.
Yes, because if the boundary between self and other, or inside and outside, is ultimately a conceptual hallucination of the visual cortex.
Which it is.
Right. If the observer and the observed are an infinite feedback loop constantly updating each other, then compassion is not some polite moral chore.
No, it's not a commandment handed down by an authority figure telling you to just be nice.
It is not an ethical debate. If there is no separate, inherently existing I, then logically and ontologically, there is no separate, inherently existing other.
When you perceive someone suffering, the perceiver you and the perceived person in pain are co-arising in that exact millisecond. You share the identical interdependent web.
It's the raw ontological physics of reality.
It really is physics.
Think of your own body. When your left hand accidentally touches a hot stove, your right hand doesn't pause to debate the ethics of helping.
Right. Doesn't say, well, I don't know, is that really my problem?
Exactly. Doesn't weigh the pros and cons or say, well, that's the left hand's fault, it should have been more careful. The right hand inherently feels the interconnectedness of a single organism, and it pulls the left hand out of the fire instantly.
It is spontaneous, uncalculated compassion. Because the suffering of the world is, quite literally, your own suffering.
Right.
To inflict harm on another out of malice or greed is to causally inject poison into the very environmental web that will instantaneously loop back to update your own perception. Hurting others is a logical absurdity when the illusion of duality collapses.
That is just incredible. To summarize the massive paradigm shift we've just undergone, by rigorously applying this 11-step Madhyamaka logic, we have proven the emptiness of the opposites of any duality.
Any duality.
Good and evil, existence and non-existence, samsara and nirvana, self and other. We have systematically removed every single conceptual floorboard beneath your feet. We have left absolutely no absolute ground for you to grasp.
And the profound miracle of this philosophy is that instead of falling into terror or the abyss of nihilism, we find that we don't actually need a floor.
We don't need the floor.
When we stop trying to freeze the river, we can simply rest. We can rest in the luminous nature of reality, participating fully and compassionately in the conventional world without being crushed by the weight of absolute extremes.
It is absolute liberation. But before we sign off today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. A challenge for you to mull over and explore on your own.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've established that every duality, every conceptual binary you use is just a mental imputation. It's a label your brain slaps onto the rushing, centerless river of reality to try and make sense of the noise. So tomorrow morning, I want you to observe the actual machinery of your own mind. Just watch it work. In that exact fraction of a microsecond, right before your mind imputes the very next concept, before it categorizes the sound as noise, or the feeling as good, or the person as other, what actually exists in those silent, sometimes terrifying, completely unlabeled gaps?
That's a powerful question.
When you tap that desk and you feel the resistance, who or what are you in that pure space between the opposites right before the edge is detected? Keep diving.